The cemetery emptied long before Nomina found the strength to move. Cold winds swept across the fresh mound of earth where her husband now rested, carrying away the last echoes of the prayers that had filled the afternoon. Every flower beside the grave reminded her of another bill she could barely afford. His illness had stolen not only his life but every dollar they had saved, leaving behind silence, debt, and an emptiness that settled deep inside her chest. She returned to the tiny house they had once filled with laughter, only to find envelopes shoved beneath the front door. Each demanded payment, each threatened legal action. By sunset, strangers were already discussing the value of her furniture, while she stood inside the living room, wondering how memories could suddenly carry price tags. Within days, she sold nearly everything she owned. The dining table where birthdays had been celebrated disappeared first, then the wedding china. Finally, even her husband's favorite armchair was carried away by someone who never knew its story. Every empty corner made the house feel less like home and more like a shell waiting to collapse. When a letter summoned her to a lawyer's office, Nomina expected another cruel conversation about debts she could never repay. Instead, the attorney unfolded an aged document bearing an unfamiliar signature. He explained that a distant relative she barely remembered had named her the sole heir to an unusual inheritance, an abandoned underground house beneath an old countryside estate. A quiet laugh escaped someone seated near the back of the room. Another quickly joined. Even the clerk struggled to hide a smile, as though inheriting a buried ruin was the final insult fate could invent. But the attorney's expression never changed. He slowly read the final sentence written in faded ink. The true inheritance has never seen daylight. For the first time since her husband's funeral, Nomina felt something stronger than grief. She felt the faint, impossible pull of hope. The following morning, Nomina drove farther into the countryside than she had ever traveled before. The paved roads slowly disappeared, replaced by narrow gravel paths winding through dense woods that seemed untouched by time. According to the faded map the attorney had given her, the forgotten estate lay beyond a rusted iron gate hanging crookedly from weathered stone pillars. Weeds swallowed what had once been a driveway, and towering trees cast long shadows over the silent property. She expected to find nothing more than the remains of an old cellar, perhaps a collapsed storage room that had inspired an exaggerated family legend. Instead, hidden beneath thick vines and layers of moss, she uncovered a perfectly carved stone entrance built into the hillside. Its heavy archway remained remarkably intact despite decades of neglect, as though someone had quietly protected it from the passing years. As she examined the entrance, an elderly farmer approached from a neighboring field. His face tightened the moment he noticed where she stood. He warned her that strange sounds often echoed beneath the ground after sunset, and whispered that several people had vanished while searching the tunnels years ago. Other villagers repeated similar stories, insisting every previous owner had abandoned the property out of fear rather than poverty. Their warnings unsettled her, yet curiosity refused to let her leave. Stepping closer, Nomina noticed details that contradicted the frightening tales. The stone doorway showed almost no structural damage. Iron hinges remained free of rust, and narrow ventilation shafts carried surprisingly fresh air from below. Strange symbols had been carefully carved into the surrounding walls, while reinforced wooden doors visible through narrow openings suggested careful engineering instead of desperation. Someone had built this place with extraordinary purpose. Just before turning back, something glinted beneath a pile of fallen leaves beside the entrance. She knelt and brushed away the dirt, revealing an old brass key, heavy in her trembling hand. Engraved upon it was an unfamiliar family crest. The mystery had only begun. The brass key felt unexpectedly warm in Nomina's hand as she slid it into the ancient lock. For a brief moment, nothing happened. Then a deep metallic click echoed through the hillside, followed by the slow groan of stone grinding against stone. Dust drifted through the air as the heavy door opened just enough for her to step inside. She expected darkness, dampness, and decay. Instead, she found a world perfectly preserved, Soft daylight filtered through hidden shafts above, illuminating polished wooden furniture untouched by rot. Shelves lined with carefully arranged books stood beside elegant tables covered with lace that had somehow survived the passing decades. Framed family photographs rested exactly where someone had left them, as though the occupants had simply stepped outside and planned to return before nightfall. Nomina wandered from room to room in astonishment. Every corner held another clue. Leather-bound journals described daily life beneath the earth. Detailed engineering drawings explained intricate tunnel systems and ingenious ventilation designs. Portraits hanging along the stone walls revealed faces carrying the same unmistakable eyes and gentle expressions she recognized in her own family photographs. Her ancestors had not hidden underground by accident. They had lived here. One journal, worn from years of handling, captured her attention more than the others. Across dozens of pages, a single phrase appeared again and again. The final vault. Every mention hinted at something precious waiting beyond the deepest passages, yet every map ended before revealing its location. Entire sections had been deliberately removed, leaving only jagged edges where crucial pages once belonged. The unanswered questions multiplied with every discovery. What was hidden inside the vault? Why erase every path leading to it? Who had decided its secret must never be easily found? Outside, beyond the cracked windows concealed by vines, a distant figure stood motionless between the trees. Hidden by shadows, unseen by Nomina, someone watched every movement she made before quietly disappearing into the forest, carrying news that the underground house was no longer abandoned. Morning light spilled across the underground study as Nomina opened another weathered journal, its brittle pages carrying the scent of old paper and forgotten years. Unlike the earlier entries describing ordinary family life, these writings were filled with urgency. The careful handwriting warned every future heir never to trust several influential families whose names had dominated the nearby town for generations. The warning appeared repeatedly, underlined with trembling strokes, as though the writer feared the message might one day be ignored. Curious and unsettled, Nomina searched through a wooden cabinet tucked beneath an antique desk. Inside, she discovered neatly folded newspaper clippings dating back decades. The headlines told a disturbing pattern. A suspicious fire destroyed a courthouse only days before important land records were due to be reviewed. Another article reported missing legal documents that mysteriously disappeared before a major inheritance dispute. Several unexplained deaths followed, each benefiting the same circle of wealthy businessmen whose family names matched those mentioned inside the journal. The coincidences were too precise to dismiss. As she pieced together the fragments, a chilling realization settled over her. The underground house had never been built merely as a refuge from danger. It had been designed to hide something so valuable that powerful people were willing to steal, betray, and even kill to possess it. That night, unable to sleep, Nomina remained inside the hidden chambers while silence blanketed the estate above. Just after midnight, the faint crunch of footsteps drifted through the ventilation shafts. Someone had entered the property. She extinguished her lantern and listened. More footsteps followed, slow and deliberate, accompanied by whispered voices echoing through the darkness overhead. Whoever they were, they knew exactly where to search. Drawers were opened, furniture scraped across wooden floors. They were hunting for something with desperate determination. Holding her breath, Nomina realized she was no longer uncovering an old family mystery. She had become part of it. The intruders vanished before sunrise, leaving no trace except muddy footprints across the abandoned estate above. Their silent search only strengthened Nomina's resolve. If strangers were willing to risk the night for whatever lay hidden below, then the truth had to be far greater than she had imagined. Returning to the underground study, she carefully unrolled the architect's faded blueprints across a massive oak table. At first glance, the drawings appeared ordinary, showing corridors, chambers, and support walls. But after hours of comparing the measurements with the actual rooms, she noticed tiny inconsistencies. Certain dimensions exceeded the visible space by only a few inches. Others ended abruptly, as though entire sections had been intentionally erased from sight. Heart pounding, she examined one suspicious wall and pressed against an oddly shaped stone. A faint click answered her touch. The wall slowly shifted aside, revealing a narrow passage hidden behind solid rock for decades. Each newly discovered corridor ended at an intricate mechanical lock, unlike anything she had seen before. Instead of keys, they required clues hidden throughout the underground house. Symbols carved into fireplaces matched markings beneath staircases. Numbers concealed inside family portraits, aligned perfectly with engraved brass plates tucked beneath shelves. Every puzzle solved opened another passage while revealing ingenious craftsmanship that transformed the entire structure into an enormous protective maze. Whoever designed this place had expected determined pursuers. Every secret passage delayed them. Every hidden mechanism protected something deeper within the earth. Late that afternoon, an expensive black car rolled through the rusted front gate. A sharply dressed land developer introduced himself with an effortless smile and offered to purchase the neglected estate immediately. The amount he mentioned was astonishing, far beyond anything the crumbling property should have been worth. When Nomina politely refused, his smile faded almost imperceptibly. Before driving away, he glanced toward the hillside entrance with unmistakable interest. For the first time, Nomina became certain the underground house was worth far more than anyone was willing to admit. Nomina watched the developer's car disappear beyond the rusted gate, but the uneasy feeling he left behind refused to fade. His generous offer had not been driven by kindness. It had been fueled by desperation. Someone wanted the estate before she uncovered whatever lay hidden beneath it. The pressure began almost immediately. One morning she found every window of her aging car shattered, with its tires slashed beyond repair. 2 days later, an official letter claimed her inheritance was under legal dispute, alleging that errors had been discovered in the original will. Soon afterward, anonymous notes appeared on the front porch of the abandoned estate. Some contained only a single sentence: "Leave before it's too late." Others were even more chilling. Some secrets were buried for a reason. Fear crept into every step she took, yet each threat convinced her she was moving closer to the truth. People did not intimidate strangers over worthless ruins. Late one afternoon, while she sorted through another stack of journals, an elderly man quietly approached the property. Introducing himself as a retired local historian, he asked if she was Nomina before carefully producing a worn leather notebook. It had belonged to her husband. Nomina's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were handwritten observations, sketches of the estate, and copied passages from old town records. Before his illness became overwhelming, her husband had unknowingly begun investigating the same mystery, believing that powerful families had manipulated generations of property records to conceal something hidden beneath the countryside. Together, Nomina and the historian compared the notebook with the underground journals and newspaper clippings. The pieces fit together with frightening precision. Fires, forged documents, suspicious inheritances, and unexplained deaths all pointed toward the same network of influential families who had quietly controlled the region for decades. The underground house was never their greatest prize. It was the one secret they had never managed to seize. And now they knew Nomina was dangerously close to finding it. The evidence left little room for doubt. Someone had spent generations protecting the underground house, while someone else had spent just as long trying to claim it. Determined to stay ahead, Nomina returned below before dawn, carrying only a lantern, her husband's notebook, and the architect's blueprints. The hidden passages stretched deeper than she had imagined. The air grew colder and thinner with every step, and the walls narrowed until her shoulders nearly brushed the damp stone. Strange symbols carved into the tunnel matched coded phrases from the journals, guiding her through twisting corridors that seemed designed to confuse anyone without the family's knowledge. Hours passed in complete silence. Then the underground house began to groan. Ancient beams creaked overhead as if the earth itself had awakened. Dust rained from the ceiling, and somewhere in the darkness, a heavy mechanism suddenly shifted. Moments later, icy water burst through cracks in the stone, rushing into the lower tunnels with frightening force. Chambers she had explored only days earlier disappeared beneath rising water, carrying away priceless journals, broken furniture, and fragments of history that had survived for decades. Nomina fought the current, refusing to turn back. Every minute lost meant another piece of her family's story would vanish forever. Following one final sequence of symbols, she reached a massive circular doorway, unlike anything else in the underground complex. The stone was polished smooth, its surface engraved with the same family crest carved into the brass key she had found beneath the leaves. Above the entrance, two weathered words were etched into the rock: Final Vault. Her heart pounded as she searched for a lock, but instead discovered an empty bronze compartment shaped to hold something small. She checked every pocket. Nothing fit. The architect's blueprints ended there. The journals offered no answer. Every map stopped at the same doorway. The last clue had been deliberately removed, and somewhere above, her enemies were drawing closer with every passing moment. Defeated but unwilling to surrender, Nomina returned to the small house where every room still echoed with memories of her husband. Somewhere, she believed, he had unknowingly left behind the answer she desperately needed. She searched every drawer, every shelf, and every box they had packed away during his illness, hoping one overlooked detail might unlock the mystery below. As evening shadows filled the room, her eyes settled on his old wooden watch box. She had been unable to open it since the day he died. With trembling hands, she lifted the lid. His watch rested exactly where he had left it, but beneath the faded velvet lining, she noticed an unusual fold. Carefully pulling it back, she uncovered a sealed envelope, yellowed with age and addressed simply, "To the one who finds the way." Inside was a handwritten letter unlike any she had seen before. It explained that the final clue had been intentionally separated from every journal and blueprint. If the underground house ever fell into the wrong hands, no thief could reach the final vault without first proving they belonged to the family entrusted with its protection. Then came the revelation that stole her breath. The inheritance had never been a matter of chance. Long before she was born, her bloodline had been chosen as the final guardians of the hidden legacy. Every generation had quietly prepared the next, protecting the secret until someone worthy could carry the responsibility forward. Her husband had begun uncovering the mystery, but he had never lived long enough to discover the truth waiting inside the watchbox. Tucked beside the letter lay a small bronze medallion engraved with the same family crest as the ancient key. Nomina closed her fingers around it. The missing piece had been waiting beside her all along. Without wasting another moment, she hurried back toward the underground estate, knowing the race for the final vault was entering its final and most dangerous chapter. The underground passages felt strangely alive as Nomina hurried toward the massive stone doorway. Every distant echo reminded her that she was no longer alone. Clutching the bronze medallion in one hand and the brass key in the other, she reached the circular entrance marked with the words that had haunted every journal she had read: Final Vault. With steady determination, she placed the medallion into the empty bronze compartment. It fit perfectly. A deep rumble rolled through the chamber as hidden gears awakened after decades of silence. Slowly, the enormous stone door began to rotate, revealing a chamber untouched by time. Nomina stepped inside and stopped breathing. The vault stretched farther than her lantern could illuminate. Neatly stacked gold bars reflected warm light across polished stone floors. Ancient chests overflowed with historic coins collected through generations. Velvet-lined cabinets displayed dazzling gemstones whose colors shimmered like captured stars. Priceless paintings rested inside climate-controlled cases, while shelves held rare manuscripts and artifacts that historians believed had vanished forever. Yet, the greatest discovery waited beyond the treasure. Locked inside iron cabinets were thousands of carefully preserved financial records, property deeds, court transcripts, and signed confessions documenting decades of fraud. Every stolen inheritance, forged signature, illegal land seizure, and suspicious transfer had been meticulously recorded by Nomina's ancestors. They had hidden the evidence until someone trustworthy could finally expose the truth. The fortune was worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The documents were priceless. They could restore stolen homes, businesses, and family lands to dozens of innocent descendants who had spent generations believing everything had been lost forever. A sudden burst of footsteps shattered the silence. The developer and several armed accomplices rushed into the chamber, their faces glowing with greed as they stared at the unimaginable wealth surrounding them. "You've done the hard part," the developer said with a cold smile. "Now, step aside." Nomina refused to move. Standing between the criminals and her family's greatest secret, she realized the true inheritance had never been the treasure itself. It was the courage to protect it, no matter the cost. The tense silence inside the vault lasted only seconds before flashing lights spilled through the underground passageways. Acting on the evidence Nomina had shared with the retired historian, authorities had quietly surrounded the estate. The developer and his accomplices found every escape sealed. One by one, they were taken into custody as officers secured the chamber that generations had sacrificed to protect. Over the following months, investigators uncovered a conspiracy far larger than anyone had imagined. The documents, hidden inside the final vault, exposed decades of forged deeds, fraudulent inheritances, bribery, and carefully orchestrated thefts. Influential families who had controlled the region through fear and deception watched their empires collapse as the truth finally reached the surface. Courtrooms that once ignored ordinary people now became places where justice could no longer be denied. Experts authenticated every artifact, every gold bar, every rare gemstone, and every historical record preserved beneath the estate. Nomina's legal ownership of the underground house and its extraordinary inheritance was officially confirmed beyond dispute. Yet the fortune never changed the woman who had once struggled to pay for her husband's funeral. Rather than building a lavish estate or chasing luxury, she honored the people who had made the discovery possible. Families whose land had been stolen received their rightful property back. Scholarships were established for children whose ancestors had lost everything to corruption. Community programs helped struggling widows and elderly residents rebuild lives once shattered by injustice. The underground house itself was carefully restored and protected as a historical landmark, ensuring its remarkable story would never again disappear beneath silence and fear. Standing inside the restored entrance, Nomina realized the greatest treasure had never been measured in gold or priceless art. It was the chance to replace generations of betrayal with hope. At last, the secret hidden beneath the earth had fulfilled the purpose for which it had been protected all those years. Justice had finally become the richest inheritance of all. Months passed, and the forgotten estate that had once stood abandoned became a place where visitors gathered in quiet admiration. Guided tours led people through the restored underground house, where carefully preserved rooms revealed the extraordinary story of a family that had chosen courage over comfort and truth over safety. Every journal, photograph, and artifact reminded those who entered that history is often protected not by the powerful, but by ordinary people willing to sacrifice everything. Nomina often walked the familiar passages before the first visitors arrived each morning. The silence no longer felt lonely. Instead, it carried the comforting echoes of those who had come before her, reminding her that their long burden had finally been lifted. She paused beside the final vault, grateful that its greatest purpose had never been wealth alone, but the justice it had delivered. Sometimes she thought back to the day she stood beside her husband's grave, convinced her future had ended with his final breath. Losing everything had seemed like life's cruelest punishment. Now she understood it had also been the first step toward discovering the purpose she was always meant to fulfill. Before leaving each evening, Nomina gently touched the old brass key hanging inside the museum entrance. It no longer unlocked hidden doors. Instead, it symbolized a promise that truth would never again be buried beneath fear. As the last rays of sunlight faded across the restored estate, the empty corridors settled into peaceful silence once more. Hidden behind an old family portrait, untouched by every visitor, rested a small, unopened envelope sealed with faded wax. Across the front, written in elegant handwriting, were 4 simple words: "To the next guardian." Whatever remained inside had waited patiently through generations. Perhaps one final secret still slept beneath the earth, waiting for the day another ordinary soul would be called to uncover an extraordinary destiny. And somewhere below, the story was not quite finished.